This episode first aired on our new channel, Leaders in Tech and E-commerce podcast. It covers supply chain tech in depth. We do hope you enjoy it and feel free to follow our other podcast as well for the latest episodes.
Happy to have with us today Johanna Småros, Ph.D. She is one of the RELEX Solutions 3 co-founders. Before founding RELEX, Johanna conducted groundbreaking research on retail supply chains. She is the author of tens of peer-reviewed academic articles on supply chain management and optimization. Johanna received the Young Scientist Entrepreneur Award in 2014 and the Veuve Clicquot Businesswoman Award in 2017. Now a few words about RELEX. RELEX Solutions is a Helsinki-based international software company founded in 2005. They are offering solutions for retail optimization to customers such as Morrisons, PetSmart, Rossmann, and AutoZone. RELEX Solutions uses AI to optimize retailers' demand forecasts and inventory flows, taking into account all known internal business decisions, such as promotions, range, and display changes, and also external factors such as seasons, events, and the weather. Then they use this demand and supply visibility to seamlessly optimize space, markdowns, as well as capacity and workforce utilization for increased retail profitability. They have offices all across the world, from Europe to the United States and Asia, especially Hong Kong, and now as well in Singapore. Hi, Joanna. Great to have you with us today.
Hello, Andre. Nice to be here.
So we had an interesting talk just now about how things are going at a global level in APAC. We are living very interesting times, to say the least. This COVID-19 crisis has put a spotlight on how important it is to have a well-run supply chain, how important it is to have a good visibility in our supply chain. And as we know, this is connected with how well our software solutions and data management solutions are working. So here is where I wanted to dig a bit deeper and have your perspective on it. So let's start with RELEX Solutions as a company. You and your other two co-founders, and I think I was reading somewhere 3 supply chain scientists actually, founded RELEX with the goal of perfecting retail operations. Tell us more about how and when was the company created and how it adds value to your clients.
Okay, so me and the 2 other co-founders, Mikko and Michael, we actually met at the logistics research group at Helsinki University of Technology and did research together. Me and Mikko finalized our dissertations, and then it was kind of time to look forward, decide on the next step. And then it was actually Mikko who presented the idea that we should take some of the ideas we developed as researchers and implement them in the real world to see that they actually work. And then we managed to talk Michael into this whole thing, although he hadn't really finalized his dissertation yet. So we basically destroyed his research career. But I think he's quite satisfied with the choice he made back then. Being researchers, we had looked at many different things in the supply chain, but something we were quite enthusiastic about was automated store replenishment. So basically forecasting and replenishment. And we have been doing research on how companies would be able to use data to more accurately and effectively manage the difficult product categories. So fresh products, products with a lot of seasonal variation in demand and promotions. And we had done a lot of research on how to do that better. And we were quite confident that there was quite a big improvement that could be had for companies, especially grocery retailers. And then we just went ahead and tried to implement these things. And actually it worked. It worked like a charm. That's how we ended up being here.
It's very interesting. So I think the year of official year of RELEX being founded was 2005, and now a few years later, it seems like it was a great success. I mean, it is a great success and a great idea. And even though Michael had to renounce a few things from his paper, I think he's happy, like you said. And Joanna, how did you decide who will be responsible for what from out of the three co-founders?
Well, basically, in the beginning, there was us three, and then quite soon a couple of other people joining the group. But it was a very, very small group of people the first couple of years. So basically, we did everything. Everybody did everything. So there wasn't a very clear division there. And then we just picked up things as they needed to get done. So, for example, Michael, our university dropout, has been running product development and also acted as CFO at some points in time. And myself, I did a lot of consulting in the early years to just kind of fund our product development. And then eventually, when it was time to start turning RELEX into an international company, I was running sales and operations in the Nordic countries. And now these last few years, I've been responsible for marketing. So I do think we are kind of not multi-talented, but ready to take on very different types of roles and challenges.
Interesting. Got it. And now coming back to the current times, right? Where a lot of clients and a lot of retailers look out to figure out what's the best solution out there. So I wanted to know more about this. How is your company helping your clients to cope with the current crisis, and maybe share some of the questions and requests that you receive most often from your clients?
Oh, that's a big question. So basically, going one step back to the basics of what we do. So as I mentioned, we've done a lot of work in automating store replenishment, but we do it for the whole supply chain. So basically, we optimize retailers' demand forecasting and inventory flows, meaning that we take into account all known internal business decisions like promotions or range changes or display changes. And we also take in all external factors such as seasonality, events, and the weather. And then we build on this kind of demand and supply visibility to further optimize not just the supply chain, but also space allocation in stores, markdowns, capacity utilization, workforce utilization, and so on for increased profitability. All of these areas have obviously been impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, but in very different ways in different retail verticals, and also in different phases. So, for example, if we look at grocery, there was an initial phase in most markets of let's say, consumer stockpiling. So I think everyone's familiar with the toilet paper crisis that's been hitting different geographies at different times. And then in those geographies where there's been significant lockdowns, people working remotely and so on, we've seen continued increased sales rates for these kind of essential products. So your basic grocery staples, for example. Then, of course, we've seen a great surge in demand for online ordering and home delivery. That applies both to groceries, but also all kinds of other things that people are buying. And then finally, of course, we've also seen the downside of the kind of lockdown on retail. So customers have needed to close stores, for example, in certain geographies. And that's also a supply chain issue. So there's kind of a wide spectrum of challenges that retailers have needed to deal with. If we start with the kind of most obvious from a RELEX perspective, that's the forecasting and store replenishment. I know some companies claim that AI can basically deal with this kind of very unusual circumstances.
Yes.
My opinion is that it's not true. If we had those fantastic AI models, we would have been able to foresee how the pandemic would develop, and we wouldn't be in this situation right now. However, having great quality software helping supply chain and demand planners manage the flow of inventory throughout the supply chains and into the stores is crucial in times like these. Our retail customers typically have tens of millions of active good flows to control. And that's basically not something you can do manually with very high quality. So what we've seen is that AI deals with the product categories that are less impacted. And then our super users have put in very clear rules for how the system should react to these demand surges to capture the impact correctly in the short term, but also filter out the impact for the long term so that we don't have inflated forecasts impacting buying months from now. So I do think that AI and machine learning is quite powerful in these situations, but the power comes from basically freeing up time for planners to deal with the, for example, supply issues that you've had around products like toilet paper.
Mm. And from all of this, like you said, there's a lot to think about, both from the retailer side. The retailers are spread across different, categories as well. Are there certain patterns, or can you recommend them some priorities that you advise the clients to focus on during these times? Because I know there is a period, right? It is now, it is the short term in the couple of months to come, and then there is long term. Is there any pattern that you see when you advise them where to focus on, or what to get in order first?
Yes, that's quite dependent, obviously, on the retail vertical. So if we're talking about these demand surge type of clients, we work a lot with grocery and for example, pharmacies. I think the important thing right now is to secure availability of essential products. They are also working hard to ramp up their fulfillment capabilities. Not everyone was seeing a huge demand for home delivery previously, and now it's been quite a struggle to increase capacity in that area, and that's absolutely the right thing to do. It makes sense from a business perspective, probably, although fulfillment tends to erode margins quite heavily. But most importantly, it's important for their communities, so the right thing to do. When things settle a bit, it's more, in a sense, business as usual. But the big challenge is, when will there be the next change in demand? So obviously for short lead time products, this is not a huge problem. So you can be a bit more reactive. Obviously, you need to work together with the suppliers still. But especially for longer lead time products, it's quite important to be quite sensitive about when to start making changes to the orders placed to suppliers to avoid a significant overshoot if, for example, demand goes back to a more normal level quite quickly. And that's very difficult to foresee. It depends quite a lot on how the pandemic evolves, but it also depends very much on for example, the decisions made by local authorities regarding lockdowns and things like that. So many of our customers are doing quite a lot of scenario planning to kind of find the sweet spot of not having excessive inventory risk, but still being quite confident of being able to meet demand in the future.
Got it. And I think you mentioned a few things, but down the line, so this year will be definitely tough for everybody involved. If a client or a potential new client comes to you now during this time, how can you help? Because there is that implementation time when, if you want to change from a system or legacy system to a new system, it takes some time and effort. Is there a way or a shortcut around that? can you help people who would like to join or to use the RELEX solution now, or is it a bit tough?
Usually implementation, well, first of all, it's all quite doable, working remotely, as we've seen with customers in many different regions. So ongoing implementations haven't really suffered from everyone working remotely. It's very much doable. Then the implementation timeline, that depends quite a bit on the customer's starting point. So our quickest implementations have been done in less than 3 months from start of kind of specification until go live. So it doesn't have to be a long implementation. It's very much dependent on how easy it is to get access to the master data and transaction data a system like ours needs. So basically, we do use a lot of historical sales data for demand forecasting and things like that. And that's something we need access to. And obviously, we need access to daily data on, for example, inventory balances and sales. So those are kind of must-haves. And that's really kind of the factor determining how quickly a client can get going.
Got it. I would want to go into the specifics as much as we can with some examples, right? Because there are some retailers doing excellent jobs at coping with the situation. There are retailers that are struggling. I would rather focus on the silver lining and the ones that are doing a great job. Are there, maybe you can give us an example of a client who's doing a good job and the reasons why they maybe what they did in the past in order for them to be better prepared, and how are they doing a good job now? Because everybody is interested to learn from others and trying to pinpoint if there are some lessons that could be learned from your portfolio.
Yeah, so I think in general, our clients have actually performed very well under stress. So we do have clients where, for example, in the very stable, normally very stable grocery business, they've seen demand increased by 30%, and demand for example, online fulfillment increased by more than 100%, almost overnight. So I do think most of our clients have done an excellent job at serving their customers. Some key points here are that retailers in regions that were not hit first, the best ones were able to learn from regions that were initially hit. So for example, and that's actually something we've been supporting as well by organizing virtual roundtables for retailers to share their insight. So it was super unfortunate for Italy in Europe to be kind of the first country hit. But for the other regions, that was a great opportunity to understand a bit what is going on. So I do think the other countries were a bit more prepared when this hit them. And there were some quite similar patterns on kind of a general level in how consumers went out to stockpile and the shift from brick and mortar to online and so on, which I think gave the most progressive retailers an advantage because they could actually start preparing, something that Italy really couldn't do. Then I do think that, and now I'm kind of promoting our own software, but it really makes a huge difference if you have flexible IT systems that you can adapt quickly to a new situation. So what our customers in general have done is to kind of take their hands off the wheel, so to speak, in the product categories where the impact has been kind of moderate, and just rely on the system to deal with it. And instead, they focus their time and effort basically working with suppliers and operations to make sure that there are goods available potentially shifting from one supplier to another, making all of these changes very rapidly, and just counting on the system being able to, for example, make sure that they still fill truckloads when delivering to the stores, even though the supplier base has been changed. And then they put in place rules in the system to adjust forecasts automatically based on what's going on. So, for example, one of our clients in Germany, a drugstore retailer, Rossmann, with I think a little less than 2,000 stores around Germany, mentioned that it took them 2 days to deal with these surging items. They put in rules in the software to deal with these very unusual demand patterns. And after that, they again reached a very high level of automation throughout. And this was just kind of the top 5% of items impacted by the demand surges. So all in all, a highly automated process that frees up time to really work with the big issues, securing supply, maximizing intelligent use of capacity, for example, by narrowing down the product range temporarily.
It's interesting. So this example of the drugstore in Germany, what did they do beforehand? I assume they were well prepared with, and they have been implemented the system for some time now to deal with the surge. Did they do something different, or what was their advantage?
I think Rossmann, as many of our other clients, have had the goal already previously to let the system deal with the kind of business as usual stuff very automatically. So they have worked towards a situation where there aren't, for example, master data issues that planners need to deal with, but rather have such high quality of input data that also the output is very high quality, meaning that there is very little need for people to adjust, for example, order proposals or safety stocks or even forecasts. And that makes a company very well prepared in a situation like this, where you actually need some manual intervention, but you have the knowledge of how to do that, not item by item, but by adding rules that deal with identified, for example, product categories or the top sellers in product categories. So they are really good at kind of making the system work for them. And that's something that is highly useful in situations of rapid change.
I agree, and I think a lot of what you're saying is a conscious effort from the leadership that this is what we want to achieve, and then discipline on all fronts to make sure the data is healthy or is there the right format and so on. Do you, because I'm interacting with quite a lot of companies, and most of them who also are in the solution space tell me that clients nowadays are already convinced of the importance of having a good system. From being convinced to actually using it and having good data, there is some light between these two ideas. But do you see any trends when it comes to transformation or digitization and the appetite of clients towards it?
When we founded RELEX about 15 years ago, things like software as a service were quite new. And there we've seen a massive transformation of clients not only being open to it, but actually requesting SaaS solutions. And I do think that has a massive impact on, for example, implementation. And that's been a big shift. I think another thing that's changed quite drastically is kind of the understanding of maths and now AI actually adding value, and that it doesn't have to be run by data scientists. It can actually be packaged into a tool that somebody who really understands the business process can be running rather than somebody that is really good at statistics, for example. So that's another big change. But I do think companies are still in different states of mind. Some are really looking for the kind of newest and latest, and well, basically AI and machine learning are the kind of keywords, whereas others are still a bit more skeptic about what can be automated and what cannot be automated. So it's not like all of the retailers would be moving at the same pace and the exact same direction. But I actually think that this crisis will also highlight how difficult it is to manage tens of millions of inventory flows effectively if you don't have that system support. It was probably doable in a very kind of steady state with, for example, grocery sales changing maybe 1 or 2% year on year. But then when you have things like this, or let's say wildfires or extreme weather events, it's very, very complicated to manage that well manually.
And like you touched upon this topic a few times, so there are people who think AI is and machine learning is going to save and solve everything, and there are people who are skeptical. I imagine that you have the role most of the time, or sometimes, to set up healthy and wise expectations towards what machine learning can do and how important is the human element to it, of managing the input data or inputting data and then inputting decisions and making the final decision, so to speak. How do you, or my question would be, is it tough, and how do you manage to set this kind of healthy expectations? What have you learned so far?
It can be a bit of a challenge because, as said, people come from different places. In that respect, some are looking for the newest of the new, and others are very skeptical of what can be automated. So I really do think that if retailers want to make good decisions about their software, they need to be ready to engage in a dialogue with the vendors. I do understand that you need to have some hygiene factors when, for example, running a buying process. But I do also think it's a high risk if you don't engage with the vendors and have that open and honest dialogue about what has a business impact and what doesn't have a business impact, and talk about customer examples and actual cases, because it's not black and white. The impact is going to be great in certain areas and very minor in others. And if you don't talk through the whole range of situations in your business, there are going to be missed opportunities, but also expectations that haven't been met. So, for example, if you look at demand forecasting, which is kind of the classical area where you would implement machine learning, I think it's an excellent idea to run machine learning in demand forecasting. It's very helpful. But the forecast as such doesn't do anything. It has to be operationalized. It has to be used for inventory optimization, store replenishment, capacity management in a good way before it actually adds any value. So if you only focus on, for example, improving forecast accuracy, but don't touch any of these other areas, the business impact may be very small. And especially in retail, where you have lots of long tail products and slow movers, having just a slight improvement in forecast accuracy may not give any benefits at all. Whereas then if you, for example, use AI to optimize capacity management in the supply chain, the outcome may be quite dramatically more impactful.
Yes, And it's a clear distinction. Again, making sure people understand and clients. I think this period is a good period of education and having a good reason to learn more, understand more about what's possible and what we should do, and each client should do to have a better result with AI. I wanted to take the discussion um, towards RELEX Solution a bit and inside the company. I was curious because you started, like you said, 15 years ago. You've grown, and now you have a very strong presence, of course, in Europe. You have a presence in the US, in APAC. I'm not sure if in other regions, maybe you can tell me about it. But what is the strategic direction of the company? Where do you see the company growing? Where do you plan to expand?
So basically, our vision as a company is to optimize retail. And as mentioned, we started with demand forecasting and supply chain optimization. But these last few years, we've been leveraging that kind of planning foundation and expanded into other core retail planning processes. And we do think that there's huge advantages of not just having kind of an integrated suite of products, but actually being able to link these processes in such a way that you can optimize cross-functionally. And just to give you an example, something simple as markdown optimization. Then you have the planning foundation in place. So, for example, our forecasting and replenishment solution, it gives you automatic visibility of future demand. It also gives you automatic visibility into what inventory you have where in the supply chain and how that will develop as a function of the demand. Which means that a system like ours can then highlight automatically which items would benefit from markdowns to clear out stock in the supply chain. So either, for example, because it's seasonal items, or because you know that there's going to be a range change and you would like to clear out the old range to make room for the new one. And then you have these components in the system. You can actually run a completely dynamic markdown process where the system highlights where markdowns are needed, uses AI to suggest the optimal markdown discount, and then actually even implement this in the stores using a mobile user interface to communicate with the stores about what needs to be done. And that really changes the game. So previously, markdowns have been typically something that retailers do as kind of a project, an end of season project, for example, the Christmas markdown project. But now you can actually do this with very little manual intervention continuously, which means that markdowns are done early enough to actually have an impact and in an optimal way to preserve as much margin as possible. And that's kind of seems like a small thing, but if you manage to throughout your process have markdowns that are some percentage points more accurate, that really accumulates over the year, over the items, over the stores, and has a huge financial impact.
So this is an element that you want to double down on, and you already have done a great job at doing it. And from a geographic expansion perspective, is still Europe being the base focus, or you're thinking about other places as well?
Yeah, so RELEX was founded originally in Finland, which makes Europe our home market. And that's where we kind of started our growth path. In 2015, we raised capital for the first time. And that was because we had decided to venture into the US market. And that's actually been a huge success story. So whereas RELEX overall has grown about 50% annually, the growth rate in the US has been quite a lot more than that. Of course, Europe is still the bigger market for us. but we don't think it will take more than a few years until the US is of equal size from our perspective. We've also just now started venturing into the APAC region. So that's like very early days. But we do see some good traction in that region and are quite excited about the opportunities we are seeing.
And me being in Singapore, I definitely see that. And the market here is being growing like crazy all over the board, not only retail, but definitely retail is a big part of it. Of course, we have the mature markets like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, but the emerging markets or more mature in Southeast Asia are also big places to grow. And now thinking about your own teams, right? Because working from home and connecting with clients remotely has been the norm in the last few weeks globally. Have there been some lessons learned from your side as leaders that are connected to how to manage remote teams, in an efficient way? Any lessons there?
I don't think it's rocket science in a way. So obviously we've been trying to see what everyone else is doing. It was a new situation that emerged quite quickly. I think, of course, that we were in a good position from that perspective that people work remotely quite extensively, also in normal times. And as we have employees in a lot of different regions and different time zones and so on, you're kind of used to the shuffle of finding good time slots for remote meetings and so on. So the change wasn't that drastic in that sense. But of course, what you miss out on when everyone is working remotely all the time is the kind of informal interaction. So the kind of business focused activities haven't changed as much, but suddenly you don't have that informal interaction of people chatting by the coffee machine or
Yes.
team leads just kind of seeing the face of a team member and being able to pick up some signals of things going really well or not so well. So we've strongly encouraged all of our team leads to make sure that there are these kind of informal team coffee breaks and things like that, just to kind of keep some element of that informal chit-chatty interaction that it's actually quite essential for well-functioning teams.
I agree. And going close to my last few questions now, Johanna, you touched upon an element that is very important, especially for I mean, you're already well established, but you're still growing culture. So culture has to be something you think about quite often when it comes to what is the culture you're trying to nurture for the company, and then how you can bring people that are aligned to that culture. Can you share your perspective on your what type of culture you're nurturing at RELEX, and how are you trying or how are you hiring for that culture as well?
That is a very good question because obviously culture is not a static thing. And I think one of the challenges of growth is that you constantly need to reevaluate things, both kind of tangible things like processes. Is this process that was developed for a company of 500 people now applicable in a situation where you have 1,000 people? But it also applies to culture, so kind of the less tangible, softer things. So are these things that served us really well up till now still valid going forward? And how much of a uniform culture makes sense when you have people in vastly different kind of companies, in that sense that, for example, APAC is really kind of in the startup phase for us,
Yes.
whereas Europe is kind of a mature business in a sense. So there is no easy answer to that. With growth, with the kind of internationalization and with the kind of different levels of maturity also within the company comes a need for having kind of different subcultures as well. So what we've tried to identify is some kind of core values, core behaviors that we want to maintain and nurture, and then be sufficiently flexible about the other things, so that there is room for people to do things differently in different markets, different situations.
I
But
would
it's
be
not
curious.
easy.
Yeah, correct. I would be curious of those core behaviors. Maybe you can share a few. I think that they're related to the growth and the success you had so far.
Yeah, I think something that people tend to pick up on very quickly when they join a RELEX is how helpful all their colleagues are. And that is something as I see as a core strength, especially when you're growing fast. Not everything will be kind of perfect. It takes time to document processes and kind of cross all the T's and put the dots on the I's. And when things develop and change very fast, there are probably going to be a lot of T's that haven't been crossed. And that's where your colleagues step in. So if not all information is perfectly documented, it's super important that the people around you are willing to help you do a great job. And that's something I think we've been very successful in. Virtuous circle in that sense that when new people join, they feel this warm welcome of everyone being there to answer their questions, regardless of what team they are in or country or whatnot. And if you just kind of go on the group chat and shout out your question, somebody will answer it, regardless of whether it's their job or not. And then when they feel this, when they join, they are going to pass it on to the next newbie. So I think that's something that's very hard to construct, but when you have this good thing going, it kind of feeds itself.
Thank you for sharing that. Yes, being helpful. Now, the last topic and last question I wanted to touch upon, Johanna, is regarding the future. So what should we expect in the next few months, and how should we prepare as supply chain professionals from your perspective?
Wow, that's a tough one. So I think my best advice is to kind of expect nothing and everything. So I do think that flexibility and adaptability is key. It's impossible to create a plan at the moment. It's possible to develop a few different scenarios and think about how quickly or slowly you can afford to react to certain signals. But basically, assuming things in this situation is going to be very, very dangerous. So I do think that retailers need to be very much on their toes, very flexible, very adaptable, very keeping a close eye on the market to come out of this in a good position.
Yes, I agree. Expect nothing, but expect but also everything. It's definitely a tough situation we are in, and we need to be flexible and adapt. I think you're spot on with that. So thank you very much for your time and sharing that. It was great to have your perspective on how things are, how they should be, or what we should focus on. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to go to www.elcotglobal.com and click the podcast button for all the show notes of the interview. Also subscribe to our mailing list to get our latest updates first. If you're listening through a streaming platform like iTunes, Spotify or Stitcher, we would appreciate a kind review. 5-star works best to keep us going and our production team happy. And of course, share it with your friends. I'm most active on LinkedIn, so do feel free to follow me. And if you have any suggestions on what to do and who to invite next, don't hesitate to drop me a note. And if you're looking to hire top executives in supply chain or transform your business, of course, contact us as well to find out how we can help.